Yes, friends, today I'm wearing black, and those of you who know me, got to know me, might find that unusual. I was once heading for an ecumenical meeting where I'd been wearing black for diplomatic reasons. On the way, I visited someone in hospital who thought I knew something that he did not about his medical condition, and he was rather alarmed about that. Today I'm wearing black because it's for Ash Wednesday, or perhaps for us in Eco Congregation Scotland, Carbon Wednesday. Carbon in our environmental speech often sounds like the new poison. We're all trying to shrink our carbon footprint. But of course, like almost every other living creature here on Earth, we are carbon-based life forms. Carbon we are, to carbon we return. Now, in places where seasonal wildfires have always been normal and expected, it is actually from ashes that new life rises. Here on Greendykes Bing, this is the site of Scotland's ancestor of fracking. As the trees actually grow, and even despite the disturbance of the motorbike scramblers, we might get one of those come by in a minute, wildlife finds a way, as in the wilderness of perhaps of Judea with Jesus, wildlife found a way. The trees have grown. There are skylarks, there are birds of prey. I've just seen a deer. Though of course the carbon dioxide from the remarkably energy intensive process that produced this hill is still up and out there. It isn't enough simply to stop doing harm because damage is done. Landscape is permanently reshaped. Action to heal can take time. Even God does not restore, does not put things back the way they were. God reuses, recycles. Now, I did some Bible study on words for dust and earth and soil in the Old Testament. I was reminded of the myth that Inuit people had 17 words for snow. The Old Testament both does and annoyingly doesn't sometimes distinguish between inert, lifeless dust, agriculturally viable soil, which is what the name Adam means, the ground and the land, which is the stuff that people are still killing each other for. And by the way, the land suffers whenever there is injustice, but the land rejoices too. And then there is ash. Ash, which comes into the story as a penitential thing. Dust and ashes in the book of Job, though those of you either with a medical background or like me with an experience of eczema might recall the healing properties of Job's skin problems associated with coal tar and carbon-rich medicines. Job sits in the ashes. Today, I have climbed a mountain of them. The most foolhardy thing you can possibly do in biblical study is to make a generalization, except for the valid one, that it is always a mistake to assume that a Bible motif is simply symbolic without depth and practical application, without depth in experience. And in an age of climate turmoil, when we hear that Jesus overtly addresses the weather, never, please, never neglect that sort of opportunity for very valuable spiritual reflection on what we're into now. In shaping Adam, the human race, God transforms dust to soil and soil to something rather special. And as the story continues, God has cause to remind Mr. and Mrs. Soil both that their health and fruitfulness is a gift not to be taken for granted, and that their destiny, like other participants in the earth, includes limited life. God says, remember, you are dust, to dust you will return. Now, some Reformed Ash Wednesday liturgies have quite fairly included the concluding line, you are dust, from dust you will be raised. In one sense, it is from the dust of the stars that we have already been raised, and the cycles of water and carbon and more, of dust and ashes, are the way that creation, which for now let's limit to the earth and the life of the earth, the way that creation embodies the kingdom, the reign that Jesus so often speaks of. Shortly after I began this role, I was inspired to hear of the folks in the Church of South India who are working on what they call their green protocol, and they ask that couples getting married who would normally traditionally have lit a carbon burning torch or lamp now plant a carbon sink tree instead. I think that's something beautiful because it fills the gap of a changed tradition with something which is at least as wholesome and authentic. So it's one thing, for instance, to promote disinvestment from ethically questionable industries, even from those which, like Scottish paraffin, provided employment in its day. But does this go together with the positive encouragement to choose something sustainable instead? Does it instead, if you're not careful, entrench inequality or not care about finding jobs in sustainable industries when the others do come to an end? It's one thing just to give up meat for Lent because of the methane produced by cattle and sheep, but if we do so, are we also attending to animal welfare and the wider problem of how to feed fellow humans to get them the protein they need healthily? Change is a must, but change can be just. So when we either decide or are forced to pause the harm we've relied on, can we choose instead what promotes a green life as a good life? Good food as more healthy food rather than something which builds up your ego because of your conspicuous self-denial. Environmental equality rather than the greed that wipes life out. We're dealing this year with the earliest written record of Jesus in the wilderness. The wilderness, which is of course any living landscape of rock and soil not currently dominated by a human agenda. That early version places Jesus alongside the wildlife, and moreover, though it's a testing time, he's also pampered by the angels in preparation for that testing. He learns to live with forces greater than himself, with cunning and with assertiveness. Jesus, the superhero, is not much use to us, but the vulnerable Jesus, who craftily appreciates how his environment is the physical and spiritual means of his survival, is a saving model for humanity today. Taking care of our weakness rather than just parading our toughness as if we were not dust, with no prospect of returning to dust, then there is hope for us. Is not the denial of our own fragility part of the gross denial of the threat to our planet and the climate injustice which holds back the deep and urgent change which is vital to what our movement is about? There is nothing subversive or even radical in recalling that Lent is above all and authentically to build you up in whatever way is right for you rather than to beat you down. So try and experience Lent as a time of being free from things you need to be free of, both as a society and as an individual. And above all, remember that you are dust. From dust you will be raised for the good of the earth and the glory of God. Amen.